My name is Eulalie Mora, and I turned 71 this spring. Most people in my neighborhood know me for two things: my stubborn roses and my habit of waking before dawn. They don't know that this morning. I wasn't up early out of routine. I hadn't slept at all. The air in Savannah was heavy with fog, the kind that clings to your skin. I sat by the kitchen window, watching the porch lamp tremble in the mist. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I kept holding the cup. It gave my hands something to do while I waited. Yesterday, I told my son Darian and his wife Rhea to leave. 8 months of walking on eggshells had worn the floorboards thin, Rhea rearranging my furniture without asking, Darian taking over my bank errands, both of them acting like my house was theirs. I'd spent 34 years paying for this place, scrubbing other people's floors so I could afford my own. I thought they'd understand when I asked for peace. Instead, Rhea laughed and said I was too old to live alone safely. Now, the safety I'd earned was exactly what they threatened. The first sound came just after 6, the jangle of tools, then a low male voice, calm and practiced. Private Locksmiths. Ma'am, we were called to open this door. Through the window, I saw their outlines on the porch, 2 men, young, wearing uniforms, and behind them, my son's tall frame and Rhea's pale coat. Then her voice cut through the wood. Open up! This house is my wife's! Darian shouted the words, as if yelling them could make them true. I set the cup down and stood slowly. My knees ached, but my mind was clear. I had known this moment would come. Last night, I'd packed a small bag, gathered what I needed, and rehearsed every step in silence. The drill whirred once a harsh, metallic bite into the lock I'd installed myself 10 years ago. The sound split the morning open. I walked toward the door, steady and deliberate. The cool tile cold beneath my bare feet. Outside, metal met metal again. Inside, I was ready. The knock turned into pounding. Then a voice, a young man's flat and professional. Mrs. Mora, we were called here to open this door. The client identified herself as the homeowner. We'll proceed unless you object. His words carried no judgment, just routine. To him, this was another job, another stubborn door. To me, it was 34 years of work and sacrifice about to splinter under a stranger's drill. I closed my eyes for a moment and saw the offices I'd cleaned before sunrise, the children I'd cared for while their mothers went to work. Every dollar saved, every blister, every sleepless night had built this place. I didn't buy a house, I built a refuge. And now my own son stood outside, ready to tear it open. I turned toward the hallway where I'd left my supplies. 4 bottles of ketchup from the dollar store, a small jar of red food coloring, old rags, and a robe that hadn't seen daylight in years. The scene was already set from the night before, just in case Rhea made good on her threats. I poured the mixture into a bowl, stirred until it darkened, and dipped the cloths one by one. The smell was sharp and sweet. I spread the rags across the entryway like fallen leaves, then pulled the stained robe over my nightgown. My reflection in the mirror startled me. Streaked arms, splattered collar, gray hair wild around my face, not broken, just prepared. The sound outside changed. The drill bit caught, whining higher, cutting deeper. Each vibration traveled through the doorframe into my chest. I moved closer, heart steady, breathing slow. A metallic snap told me the outer lock had given way. Darian's voice rose urgent, triumphant. That's it. Keep going. We're almost through. I reached for the small brass latch just above the knob, the one I'd added years ago, invisible from outside. My fingers brushed the cold metal. I waited until the next screech of the drill, then turned it. The click was soft but final. The door swung open, and the world exploded into noise. Rhea's scream tore through the morning. One locksmith dropped his tool, the other stumbled back. My son froze on the threshold, his mouth open but wordless, and I stayed kneeling on the floor, calm amid their terror. The red still dripping down my sleeve. For a moment, no one moved. The morning light hadn't yet reached the porch, but I could see their faces clearly, the locksmiths pale, Rhea clutching her chest, and Darian standing behind them as if he'd just realized the world had turned upside down. The younger locksmith muttered something under his breath, then stepped back toward the steps. "Ma'am, I think we've made a mistake." Rhea's voice cracked through his words. "She's lost her mind. Look at her. She hurt herself just to make us look bad." I didn't answer. I simply stood, letting the sticky red mixture slide down the hem of my sleeve. My knees ached, but my voice was steady when I spoke. "You brought men to break into a home that isn't yours. That's trespassing." Porch lights began to blink on along the street. Neighbors peered out, one by one. Mr. Hector from next door shuffled closer in his robe, gripping his cane. "What's going on here?" "Miss Mora," he asked. "She's insane," Rhea shouted, pointing at me. "This house belongs to my husband. It's in his name, Mr. Hector squinted at her, then at me. "That's funny," he said. "I've lived next to Eulalie for 20 years, watched her replace that porch light herself, pay the taxes herself. Her name's on every bill." The locksmiths exchanged nervous glances. One whispered to the other, "I'm not getting paid enough for this." Before gathering his tools, sirens wailed in the distance, and I felt the first tremor of relief. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up. The older officer stepped forward first. Gray hair visible under his cap, his badge read, "Lang, Morning." "Folks," he said evenly. "Who called this in? I did," Mr. Hector said, raising his phone. There was a drill, shouting. I thought somebody was in danger. Officer Lang nodded, then looked at me. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" "No," I said. "It's Ketchup." They were forcing my door. His partner, younger and cautious, scanned the porch. "Can we see identification for everyone here?" Rhea fumbled through her purse. Darian avoided my eyes as he handed over his wallet. I pulled my ID from my pocket and then from a small folder on the console table. The property deed. My fingers left faint red smudges on the edge. "This house," I said quietly, "is mine. Purchased in 1995. Paid off 8 years ago. No other names attached." Officer Lang studied the document, then passed it to his partner. "It checks out," he said finally. "Mrs. Mora is the legal owner." The words landed like stones. Rhea's shoulders slumped. She sank onto the steps and covered her face. Darian stood frozen, his head bowed, shame carved into every line of him. I leaned against the doorframe, feeling the morning air touch my face. It smelled of iron and salt. Sharp, clean, final. The officers kept their tone even, businesslike. One of them clipped a small camera to his vest, while the other read Rhea her rights under the trespassing statute, just in case. No one raised their voice. It was all paperwork now. Quiet. Procedural. Undeniable. Rhea wiped her face with the back of her hand and stepped inside. I followed at a distance as Officer Lang spoke into his radio, noting the time of entry. The young officer carried a clipboard and a printed form for inventory. "We'll need to log whatever she removes," he said. "Standard procedure." "I understand," I replied. My voice sounded strange in the emptiness of the living room. The house looked different already. I'd packed their things the night before, clothes folded neatly in boxes, shoes paired by the door, the kitchenware they'd bought stacked on the counter. I'd labeled everything in black marker RHEA, Darian, to make sure there would be no confusion later. Rhea's heels clicked against the floor as she moved from room to room. She didn't look at me. Every few minutes, she called Darian's number, her tone shifting from pleading to angry, then finally to nothing but silence. The calls went unanswered. The younger officer made small check marks beside each item. All accounted for, he murmured. No damage. When the boxes were carried out, the porch felt smaller, crowded with cardboard and the weight of endings. Ria leaned against the railing, hair falling across her face. Phone still in her hand. The sound of an approaching taxi broke the air. Officer Lang helped load the boxes into the trunk while I stood by the doorway, gripping the edge of the frame. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt tired, hollow in a way that went beyond the night's chaos. Ria turned before stepping into the cab. Her mascara had streaked, her voice low and flat. You've destroyed your own family, Eulalie. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't make things worse. The taxi pulled away, its taillights glowing red through the mist. The officers thanked me for my cooperation and left soon after. When the last car disappeared, the street fell silent again. Just the hum of cicadas, the smell of damp pavement, and the faint tremor of my hands resting against the door I had fought to protect. 3 days passed in uneasy quiet. The porch still smelled faintly of sawdust and ketchup, a strange reminder of what had happened. I swept twice a day, not because it needed cleaning, but because the motion steadied me. The phone rang mid-morning while I was wiping the kitchen counter. Mrs. Eulalie Mora. The voice was brisk. Practiced customer service wrapped in apology. This is First Coastal Bank's fraud department. We're calling to verify recent charges on your new Platinum Rewards card, ending in 4811. I don't have that card, I said. There was a pause. Then polite confusion. It was opened 3 weeks ago under your name and social security number. We've flagged unusual activity charges totaling $4,200 at restaurants, jewelry stores, and online boutiques. The words didn't make sense at first. They came like cold water down my back, slow and shocking. I asked the woman to read the billing address. She did. It was mine. I sat down at the table, gripping the edge, so someone used my identity. Yes, ma'am. It appears so. We'll need you to file a police report and submit a notarized fraud affidavit. I can email the forms now. Her voice stayed calm and professional, while my world tilted slightly off its axis. I scribbled notes, though my hand shook. When the call ended, I opened my laptop. The transactions listed there felt like fingerprints: an upscale restaurant in downtown Savannah, a boutique near the riverfront, a jewelry store receipt with a date I recognized, the weekend before Ria's birthday, that necklace she'd worn at breakfast, silver with a red stone. She'd said Darian found it on sale. I remember the way he'd looked down when she said it. I wanted to deny the thought forming in my head, but it rooted itself anyway. My son, my only child, had stolen from me, not by mistake, not out of confusion, out of choice. The nausea rose slowly, pressing against my ribs. I stood, walked to the living room, and looked at the framed photo on the mantel. Darian at 10 years old, gap-toothed, holding a paper kite we'd made together. His smile then had been unguarded, proud. Now, staring at that same face in stillness, I could no longer see the boy I'd raised, only the man who'd learned how to sign my name. He came just before noon, when the sun was high and the cicadas loud enough to hide the sound of his footsteps. I saw him through the screen door, shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, hair that looked as if he'd slept in a car. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I come in?" For a moment I couldn't speak. The memory of the bank call still clung to me like damp air. I stepped aside without answering, and he crossed the threshold, looking smaller than I remembered. He sat at the kitchen table, same chair he'd once used to do his homework. His hands trembled as he held his coffee mug, the one with chipped blue paint. "I know why you're angry," he began. "Ria's gone. She left 2 days ago. I didn't what I asked." My voice sounded calmer than I felt. He looked up, shame flashing in his eyes. Didn't mean for it to go that far. I was behind on bills. The job interviews weren't working out. Ria kept pushing. She said we deserved better. I thought I could handle it. Pay it off before you noticed. I set a folder on the table. The same one I'd shown the police years ago when I first proved this house was mine. Inside were the bank's fraud forms and a printed statement of every charge. I slid it toward him. You're going to sign a confession, I said. You'll send it to the fraud department yourself. I've already reported it. But they need your signature to close the case. His face crumpled. Mom, please, this'll ruin my record. Can't we fix it quietly? I took a breath. No, you fix it honestly. That's the only quiet I can live with. For a long time, there was only the buzz of the cicadas and the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Then he reached for the pen. His hand shook as he wrote his name each letter like an apology he couldn't say aloud. When he was done, I opened my wallet and laid 2 folded bills on the table. This is $200, I said. A loan. Not a gift. It'll cover groceries and gas until your first paycheck. He looked up. Bewildered. You'd still help me. I'm not helping, I said softly. I'm letting you stand. He nodded, tears cutting through the dirt on his cheeks. As he walked toward the door, I felt something give way inside me. Not forgiveness, not anger. Something quieter, heavier, like a knot finally untied. Before he stepped off the porch, I said it aloud. Steady and final. Loving you doesn't mean rescuing you anymore. The next morning, I dressed carefully pressed blouse, neat slacks, shoes that didn't squeak on the tile, some battles I'd learned were won by looking steady even when your hands shook. The First Coastal Bank branch smelled faintly of printer ink and coffee. I waited in line behind a young couple arguing over a mortgage payment. When my turn came, the clerk directed me to the fraud department at the back. That's where I met Cecilia Nguyen, mid-20s, tidy bun, voice clear but gentle. She introduced herself with the kind of patience people use when they know they're about to ask for paperwork you don't understand. Mrs. Mora, I've reviewed your file, she said, tapping her keyboard. You did the right thing reporting early. It'll take about 30 days to complete the investigation. For now, we'll issue a provisional credit, but you'll need to submit this affidavit and a copy of your ID. I signed where she pointed, line after line. The words, identity theft, unauthorized use, pending review blurred together like fine print on a nightmare. When I finished, Cecilia smiled faintly. We'll contact you as soon as we verify. Try not to worry. I almost laughed at that. Worry had become a muscle memory. Still, her kindness wasn't wasted. I thanked her, tucked the carbon copies into my bag, and left. Savannah's heat pressed against my skin as I walked home. The streets were bright and ordinary, as if nothing in the world had shifted. But inside me, something had a quiet exhaustion mixed with resolve. The house greeted me with its familiar stillness. No voices, no footsteps, no slamming cabinets, just my clock ticking. My porch creaking with the wind. Peace, I realized, could sound like absence. That evening, Mr. Hector came by with 2 cups of lemonade. He was dressed in his usual suspenders and worn hat, eyes sharp with concern. Been hearing things. He said, You holding up? Eulalie. I nodded, getting there. Slowly, he sat beside me on the porch, setting the cups down. You did what needed doing. Sometimes kindness goes too far and turns into permission. I looked out at the street, at the door I'd fought to keep mine. Maybe that's what I'm learning, I said, where kindness ends and dignity begins. We sat without speaking for a while, the sun lowering behind the moss trees, the quiet finally starting to feel like peace. 4 weeks later, the letter arrived. No return address. Just my name written in uneven script that trembled with effort. Inside was a folded note and a $100 bill. Mom, I got a job at a grocery store on Victory Drive. It's not much, but it's honest. This is the first payment. More will come, Darian. I held the bill between my fingers for a long time. It smelled faintly of dust and something sweet, like the air inside a store freezer. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the fact that he'd sent it at all. That same afternoon, the phone rang. Mrs. Mora. This is Cecilia Ninguin from First Coastal Bank. Her voice carried a smile. We've completed our investigation. You've been cleared of all liability. The debt is officially closed. Your credit is fully restored. I thanked her softly. When the call ended, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. For weeks, I'd been bracing for another blow, another letter, another demand, but it was over, for the first time in months. I didn't owe anyone anything, not even my son. Rhea never called again. Word around town was that she'd left the state, maybe gone back to her mother in North Carolina. I didn't ask. Some stories didn't need endings. They just needed distance. The house began to feel alive again. I opened windows, let the air move through. I bought new curtains. Pale yellow like the ones I'd dreamed of years ago but never justified buying. And one morning, when the light was soft and the world seemed forgiving, I took out my old paints. At the Savannah Senior Center, they were looking for volunteers to teach weekend art classes. I hadn't touched a brush in a decade, but the smell of turpentine felt like a heartbeat returning. The first class was small 5 women, all older than me, all laughing too loud, but something inside me loosened. I went home that evening with paint on my fingers and quiet joy in my chest. The mailbox waited by the road, and for once, it didn't look like a threat. It looked like possibility. 6 months passed quietly, marked by slow mornings and the scent of paint. The seasons shifted, and Savannah's air grew warm again, soft, forgiving. I'd stopped checking my phone for calls that never came. I'd stopped rehearsing old arguments in my head. Then, one Saturday afternoon, I saw a car park by my gate. Darian stepped out wearing a green grocery store uniform, his name stitched neatly above the pocket. He looked stronger, the way people do when they finally carry their own weight. "Hey, Mom," he said with a small smile. "Can I come in?" I nodded, unlocking the new latch I'd installed myself. He handed me an envelope before sitting down at the kitchen table. "It's $500 this time. I'm saving from every paycheck, and—" He hesitated, then added, "I enrolled in night classes. Business administration, just a certificate, but it's something." I looked at him closely, his eyes clear, voice steady. "That's good. Darian, really good." He leaned back in the chair, glancing around the house. "It feels lighter here," he said. "Peaceful." "It is," I replied. "It took work." He nodded, understanding more in silence than words could say. We talked for a while about his job, his co-workers, the new manager who gave him extra hours. There was warmth between us again, but it had edges now, clear edges. When he left, the sun was setting. I followed him to the porch and watched his car disappear down the street. Then I turned to the front door, where I'd screwed a small brass plaque into the wood just that morning. It gleamed faintly in the golden light. "Home by invitation only." Beside it, the new motion light blinked on automatically, soft but sure. I stood there for a long time, listening to the crickets rise with the dusk. The house behind me felt whole, no longer a fortress. Not a burden either, but a space shaped by choice. Love, I realized, doesn't mean drowning for someone. It means knowing when to swim back to shore. And peace, real peace, is priceless.